Welcome to this week's vlog, where we're diving into how assessments shape learning. Today, we're joined by Debs and Jeremy, two school leaders working at international schools in South America. We're grounding our conversation in Dylan Williams' paper, What is Assessment for Learning?, and unpacking what truly makes assessment effective or not. We'll look at how some schools are using assessment to support student growth and where it might be falling short. And we'll ask the big question, how can we make it better so it truly serves our students? Stick around for a thoughtful conversation about turning assessment into a powerful tool for
Well,
learning.
definitely, man. Debs, it's a pleasure to be with you here today, as usual, as we dive into this conversation about standardized tests. I'm not a big test guy. I don't love it because it just means more work for me to grade. You know what I mean? But what I'll do is I'll share my screen with you because I had a chance, as we were expected to do, to create the chart, right? And so let's see. Just want to make sure here's my chart. As you can see, we test a few different things, right? We test map growth. We do map testing, but also I'm an NYP DP teacher, so we also have to focus on the DP exams, right? Language A, language B in the English department. And then obviously we have other internal writing benchmarks, and then WIDA, which I don't do too much WIDA because WIDA is mostly for students who are approaching proficiency, right? Just to test that. But the main purpose of map growth, for example, as you can see here, that I included, was to track students' progress in reading, math, and language. There are some strengths. So the strength is it's adaptive to student level, right? Which is very, very good because it can accommodate them, right? When we talk about things like differentiation, right? This, I think map is great for that.
It also provides map. It has that when you don't necessarily have the information about exactly what knowledge they're missing, it provides that extra bit about the following the students missing, and it gives you a list of all of the different concepts that they've not quite understood. I've lost you, Jeremy. You back?
Yeah, I'm back. I got kicked off. Oh man. All right, cool.
That's okay.
Yeah, awesome.
The screen just froze for a little bit. But I was
Okay.
saying the wonderful strength about this as well is it indicates the areas of weakness, and it gives you a list, and certainly in the science section, it tells you what science is or
Exactly.
what aspects the student hasn't understood or what knowledge they're missing.
Right.
So it's a really
Exactly.
good thing to be able to know what's missing out of it.
Exactly. However, there are some weaknesses, right? And one of the main weaknesses is that it doesn't really align with the IB curriculum, right? This map testing. And because of that, it might cause some test fatigue because the students don't kind of like see a connection between what they're being asked to do or why they're consistently doing this, at least up until, for us, we don't do it after 9th grade, right? So just before we move on to the next, if we look down here, we'll see an indication of that, right? For example, here, these are our students here. These are my students. And you'll see that most of the students are between the 41st and 60th percentile, right? And it's not because they don't deserve to be higher up. It's just that after doing this for so long, they've lost, that sense of willingness to do tests, And just so
How many times a year do you do it?
Twice. So we do it in the fall and we do
year.
it in the spring, yeah. And so like this is one student, for example, and we can see that I've been here 2 years. So before I came, he dropped, right? And then I managed to get him up here. And then all of a sudden, this last test, he dropped. And so this is in no way an indication to my level of teaching. It just, it goes to show you that, David he's not a student he's like me, he's not a great test taker. He's not interested in it. So he rushes through it just to finish it. And that's it. He's bored out of his mind when it comes to sitting there and doing tests, right? And so then we
also sometimes see that drop in September. If you do
right,
it at the beginning of the academic year, you always drop at the beginning of the year, and it tends to go back up again, and then they drop back down again.
Exactly.
So doing it twice a year.
Right. 100%. And I think that's because they're home all summer, not even practicing any English, not listening any English. So it happens, So yeah, we'll get them
Absolutely.
back up soon. So anyway, so then we have the IB, NYP, DP exams, right? The purpose is to certify achievement and prepare students for tertiary education. It's an international benchmark, and it measures the depth of content and critical thinking. However, it's high stakes because that's what dictates whether they get this certificate or not, and it can be stressful, right? And overview is just like a snapshot of the ability as opposed to kind of like real in-depth analysis. It's not like the SATs or something like that, which is I think is a little bit more thorough. And then we have our internal writing benchmarks, right, which assesses writing growth across terms, right? Teachers teacher designed and it's teacher design and curriculum aligned. So that's the strength, right? I love giving different writing assignments in our class, and I'm able to measure them. However, now I'm differentiating. I'm giving other assessments that may not be writing per se, but it tests almost the same thing. It also, but the downside is that it's subjective grading risks, right? Because you have to have a solid rubric, right? And then students may be doing good, well in some aspects of that, but not in other aspects. And then they have to get an overall grade, which may not be fair in some regard, right? And it can be inconsistent across graders, right? So, we try to norm on some things. My co-teacher and I, who's teaching another class over there, and she's looking more for grammar and punctuation stuff. I'm more looking for depth of analysis, etc. Right? So how do we really
And
like norm and align on that? Yeah, exactly.
you didn't want to get together and say, let's focus on one.
We do as best as we can, but sometimes, unfortunately, we drop the ball, on that. And then finally, you have the WIDA, which measures English language proficiency. It can be like below the standard of what we require here at our school, right? And so it's kind of another time wasting activity many of the teachers feel, and some of the students as well. However, it does give them clear placement, in the like EL, and it manages to track language growth if it's done consistently, right? However, it's limited to just language, right? And it definitely does not reflect classroom performance because it's another one of those, not a part of the curriculum. It's just dropped in there at an inopportune time of the year. So this is mine, and
It's
and
also it's an international thing because I've
right,
used Reader in the past, and
right,
my own children who speak fluent English, they've got a large vocabulary. They
right,
only got a 4.
exactly,
Now,
yeah,
it's not therefore, well, what is
right,
the proficiency that you're looking for now? It might be related to the fact that they don't write so well
right,
or
right,
something similar. But
yeah,
then if you're going to use it just with international students,
right,
you're not seeing actually whether your English speaking students are of that level as well. So
true,
I'm intrigued
yeah,
as to what their boundaries are simply because
exactly,
I've got children who have used it in an
right,
international context, but because they covered everyone,
right,
that meant that every single child had to take the test to see where they were. And mine
mm,
came below a 5.
wow, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And apparently, if you're less than a 5, then oh, yeesh.
Oh, you're still here, yeah.
I
So
am still here. Sorry, the phone went
yeah.
and then the whole screen
Oh,
disappeared.
I got you.
If you're a 5, then if you said they said if you're lower than a 5, then you need intervention in English. And
Right,
it's like, well, hang on, I've got perfectly good speakers of English. So
yeah,
it didn't make sense to me that that was the case.
right,
So I found it interesting. I don't think it's a good one if you're only going to use it with foreign students to know where they're at. I say
mm,
foreign English as a second language students to know where they're at with regards to fluency. But unless you're going to test every student worldwide,
right, yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
they're going to have some issues with it, I think.
Right. No, I think you're right. I think you're right, 100% for sure. All right, so this is mine. I'll stop sharing my screen. You could throw yours up there, right?
Okay. Uh, Entire screen. So I am moving now to mine.
There you go.
So mine's in a Word doc. I'm afraid I'm not as
No, no, it's
beautifully
okay.
presented as you are.
Nah, please.
I'm going to start with the internal standardized testing.
Right,
Um, at the end of the day, I kind of looked at it. Um, it's supposed to be all standard tests are supposed to be a comparison between the norm, is the
right,
way I look at it. So these the tests that were given over the past 2 years. Unfortunately, I don't have 2025 data because they're doing them now. So I've taken the first trimester testing, and it's been the same in this school for the last X number of years. And I'm quite surprised at the way things are tested. So what we've got is here you'll see basically all the scores are super high. And if you take a look at all of these different scores, I'm absolutely gobsmacked because they're all too high.
Right.
Nobody's anything lower than a 7 out of 10. So this is a percentage, I guess, because we do marks out of 10 in the Brazilian system.
Okay.
And the fact that the average grade for every single subject, except for science in year 7 and French in year 8, they're all in the eights. They're all 80 something percent. And I can't believe that that's possible.
Mm.
Now, there are things that I've seen in the current exams that has made me think they are standard because they haven't really changed, but they're too easy. And I'll come to that in a minute. So in these tests, what you've got, these are the averages, by the way, of 2 pop quizzes per trimester, 1 project per trimester, and an exam.
Okay.
Now, the pop quiz is basic recall. The project does allow them to think a bit more, but is often collaborative. And the rubrics have what I would suggest are quite weak standards, but we they are still rubriced and they do still have standards. And the exam is nearly all recall.
Okay.
So what I've noticed is that they've not got any higher order thinking skills. And when I
Mm.
look at scores like this, I'm thinking IB, and therefore I'm thinking that somebody who's in a 9 or in an 8 or even a 7 out of 10, according to the IB, these are people who are able to seriously inquire for themselves. They're at the very top end of their knowledge and understanding of every
Right.
single part. They're able to apply it in different
Right.
circumstances. They've
Mm.
really got the concept understood. But in
Right.
actual fact, it's a score according to basic recall. So their level of inquiry, their level of thinking, if you were to take a look at Bloom's taxonomy, is right down at the bottom.
Understand.
So then, um, I've put in the strengths and weaknesses of our internal testing methods. The pop quizzes, they are short, but that can be really useful because it's more like a little formative thing to find out, do the kids know what they've been taught?
Right.
They do assess a moment in time. There's a small amount of content. They might be, checks the end of topic test of, for example, are they understanding what we're teaching them right now? So
Right.
they can be super useful. With regards to the weaknesses, it's the same type of assessment as an exam. So there's no change in the assessment type,
Mm.
and that for me is a really big issue. Um, no notice. So some of the kids, because they've not been allowed to revise or they've not been allowed to catch up, some of the students may say that it's not fair. I didn't get the chance to do it, and they feel
Mm.
a bit unprepared for it. But then
Right.
if they know that pop quizzes are coming and they know that they exist, I kind of also think that although that's a weakness, it can also be a strength because I think
Mm.
having a moment's notice gives you a proper knowledge of where the kid is at and they haven't just gone home and done a full night of revision.
No cramming. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Right.
sometimes that doesn't really give anything decent.
Right.
With regards to collaborative, um, the projects are great. They've got collaborative learning. They are a really good chance for low abilities and SEN to gain some higher grades. They allow the kids for once to do good inquiry and research and so forth.
Right.
Um, However, sometimes when they're collaborative, and this is the part, sometimes it means that certain individuals in the group are going to do more work than others.
Yep.
Uh, Generally, they're also done, some of them are done at home. And then you've
Right.
got parents involved, especially with
Of
the younger
course.
years that frightened
Yeah.
that their kids are going to get bad marks. And
Right.
so you
Right.
don't really know whether or not the kids are doing it.
Right.
It's good and bad about every single form of assessment, right?
True.
Finally, the exam, the 60% of the entire weighting comes on an exam every trimester.
Mm.
They're generally an hour and a half of exam,
Okay.
and there are a variety of questions in the sense of there's multiple choice and there's short answer questions. When I put extended response questions, ERQ,
Right.
in some subjects, there will be some Bloom's leveling, in the sense of there might be someone who puts in a explain such and such, or apply your knowledge of this to that concept. Unfortunately, most of the questions were recall,
Mm.
which is a real disappointment.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No
Um,
real analysis happening.
no. Now, with that in mind, what it is good for is the very typical standardized testing of the IB and the
Right.
NA. When
Yeah.
I say IB, you wrote that IB was more like a moment in time. The fact that the IB covers 2 years worth of content in that time, that 2 years, I think that they're covering that content. They're also incorporating a lot of information. They're also learning skills.
Mm.
And then, of course, they've got the IA, which allows them to do some form of research and inquiry. So for me, the IB is a little bit better. The NA is definitely recall. NA is our national examination, and I'm
Okay.
going to talk about both of those in a minute.
Nice.
Weaknesses of our horrible exams, which I'm not a big fan of at the moment, there are only 10 questions.
Right.
In an hour and a half, they have 10 recall questions. So every single question is worth the equivalent of 10%.
Right.
So if you get one wrong,
Mm. It's a lot.
you're 10% less.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me,
Heavily
that does
weighted.
not provide
Right, right, right.
a decent amount of marks that you can actually statistically analyze.
Okay.
Um, there weren't so many questions on higher thought processing. The exam conditions are constantly going on. They're 3 times a year. Um, no chance of presentation skills or research skills or inquiry based skills. And,
Understand.
yes, they've got a project, but really 60% of the mark is on the exam. So
Yeah.
it's not really taking into account that higher thought processing is actually more important, and understanding the concepts is more important. It's kind of saying that, you know what, we want you to be able to recall and regurgitate the
Right,
information
right, right.
in class. So
Yeah.
the teachers
Very
tend to
antiquated. Yeah.
do it.
Very antiquated method of
Yeah,
instruction in
it
school,
is.
right? Yeah.
These are not of change.
Yeah.
The kids are extremely stressed during exam time. I have not seen anything like it.
Mm.
Um, in previous schools I've worked in, they've never been as stressed as they are here.
Wow.
Getting tens is something that they're all desperate to get, 10 out of 10, which
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I don't think that that's realistic.
Right, right.
Not in life. And certainly, you expect to sometimes to get the top 25%, but
Definitely not the top one
if you
percent
get
all
less
the
than a
time.
seven, you fail.
Yeah.
So you're saying that you've got to get more than 70%, which is otherwise you're failing, which I find also very difficult to understand. Very
Mm.
different from the IB marks. So this is about they're definitely focusing on something that is not necessarily achievable,
Fair enough.
which is why all of the grades are so high, the
Makes sense.
averages.
Yeah, makes sense.
Uh, I've written in there as well, variety of questions a week, little time during lessons to active students as owners of their own learning and instructional resources.
Mm.
Statistically, the data from the exams is not really useful. It's not good. You can't
Right,
use it to properly analyze the learning because they
right.
haven't got a variety of questions. The questions are also not split so that if you have got higher thought processing, it's worth more marks. They are literally just every single question is worth 1 mark without change.
Hmm.
Um, and I added in there about the analysis and the feedback. If because we're giving out these exams, I thought that it was important that what's the feedback that they get, because these are internal,
Right.
and pretty much they don't get the feedback either. So what's the point in assessing?
Exactly.
They
Agree.
got given the exams back with the grades, and then the grades go into our system, which is just down here.
Okay.
They put the grades in here, and the parents get them at home. So this
Mm.
is our.
What's the
It's called
name of the system that you guys use?
it's called Sponge.
Ah,
It's a
cool.
Brazilian
Cool.
system. It's a management system made by Brazil. You've
Right.
got the written test, the project, the pop quiz 1 and 2, and then all the grades go in. And then I can click here the média prevista, which is the mean grade, and that will
Right.
appear at the end
Okay.
with the weightings added. So there's no feedback. So the kids get the exam back, but not necessarily go through it.
Right.
There was no, so I've left them to do this time round. I've not got involved because it's a brand new school. I wanted to see how it was done in the past and how things could be improved.
Gotcha.
So that's in my activity one on what we can do next time. And feedback is number one up there, that we need to give the details back. We also offer external tests. Um, and I added this little bit here. If used appropriately, assessment can substantially improve learning. And the question is, are we using it appropriately? And if little
That's the question.
accommodations are provided for different learning styles, then surely this limits learning of less standardized students. And if assessment is mostly multiple choice questions, which ours are, and recall, then how is conceptual understanding confirmed? So
Well, let's talk
these
about that a little
exams, on
bit.
the other hand, sorry?
Oh, I was saying, well, let's talk about that a little bit because actually that's one of the
Yep,
things that, Mr. Dylan Williams
yep,
discussed in his paper. We want to know based on that what are the differences? Like, how do we know that's effective assessment or ineffective assessment, right? So one of the
absolutely.
things, yeah, one of the things he said kind of like aligns with what you were saying earlier is that if the information is just simply recorded, then the control loop cannot be closed and dangling data is substituted for effective feedback, right? There's no real feedback, So when I saw that's actually on I think it's page 4, right? And that was an example of ineffective assessment. And so when saw that, the idea that came to my mind was that then we know we have to have feedback that results in action, right? Not just data collection. It cannot just be data collection. So for me, example, in my class,
Exactly.
one of the reasons that I loathe these assessments is like, what's the point of testing a skill? I guess it's point. There might be a point to it just to kind of like close the chapter, but that's the idea, right? It's closing the loop. But if you're just assessing and then you're going to get the information, not going to do anything with that, then it's pointless. So that's ineffective. But similarly, for effective assessment, right, it has to ultimately yield improvements in student achievement, right? So it has to achieve. And he quoted Black and William on that. So yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, I have to say, I mean, the fact that they're just recall,
Right.
then all your testing is knowledge,
Right.
or memory.
Yeah.
Because I know that certainly sometimes I've crammed for exams in the past. I know that I can keep knowledge for a couple of weeks
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
gone.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if they're aiming to work towards these exams at the end, which are these huge exams, inane and the IB,
Mhm.
then that recall isn't useful
Right.
because you're not going to remember 2 years worth of content and you can't revise it overnight.
Exactly.
So you're going to
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
understand the concepts rather than just recall. And
Exactly.
and this is the big issue because how do you get these grades? I don't know. It's for me, this is a really bad form of testing, and I'd like to make some huge changes.
There you
And
go.
I've
So
come up with
what
lots of
changes would you
ideas.
make if you could make, let's say, 2 changes to this system to make it a little bit more effective? What would you do?
Right, number one, I don't mind the pop quizzes. The pop
Okay.
quizzes do check understanding, and you could perhaps keep those in there and do two or even three, or maybe have a pop quiz for end of unit, sort of mini end of unit test. It's checking understanding and knowledge. That's what I would use those for. I would have probably more than one project type, but you can have different, they called it a project. So this could be a
Right.
presentation.
Mhm.
This could be, I don't know, in the form of a booklet. It could be a collaborative project. It could be an
Right.
independent project. And rather than having just one of those, I would probably have two or three of those,
Hmm.
where you've got research involved, where you've got inquiry involved, where you've got uh, basically you're forcing the child to, or the students to actually learn the concepts, possibly alone with support. You're teaching the student how to learn.
Right.
And by doing that, you're providing them with the skill that they're going to keep forever.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would probably stick, if we have to do exams and they want to keep the exams in for grade 6 and grade 7 and grade 8, because I focused on this on middle years, then I would suggest that we do them once a year at the end of the year.
Hmm.
But in all honesty, for middle years, I wouldn't incorporate exam at all.
Fair
I
enough.
would want to do the pop quiz to check the knowledge and understanding. I would want the projects to teach them the skills of inquiry and to allow them to broaden their own understanding of the concepts and to achieve those higher order thinking skills, such as analyzing, such as evaluating their own learning skills as well. I would have them doing, gosh, far deeper learning
Yeah.
ideas
Yeah. All right. Well, let
and
me
not
show you.
exam until they hit high school, because the high school insists on these ones here, the
Right.
NA. I moved the stuff around there, but the high school exams insist on having that ability to absorb knowledge and recall it. But by this stage, I would hope that
Right.
you've learned how to learn
Exactly.
and that you have actually got a better and deeper understanding of the concepts, and therefore you actually can demonstrate your understanding and you can link everything together rather than it be recall.
All right.
And
Well,
we
let me
have
show. Let me
two
show you
main
one.
exams, which is the NA. And
Yeah.
here is a comparison of our school data versus the average in Brazil. We
Right.
are
Okay.
higher, but we're also, these exams are huge.
Right.
They're not dissimilar to the SATs in the fact that they're multiple choice and they're checking
Okay.
knowledge. And you have 2 days. One is a more of a literary day where it's a lot more reading. There's also an essay that they have to write on day one. And the
Nice.
second day is the sciences and the maths. They are both 2 days of 5.5 hour exam with no breaks, but you are allowed to take food in with you.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is a massive amount. And then they
Wow.
split it into these sections. So you've got languages,
Mm-hmm.
humanities,
Okay.
science,
Science.
math, and then the Hidasam is an essay.
What
It
is
works.
that? Redashao? Redashao?
It's called Hidasam,
Hit
and it's
that.
an essay that they have
Ah,
to
got
write.
you.
And
Got you.
it's not at all the same as the IB English A
Mm,
or the IB A language A essays.
right, right.
This is an essay that is, they give you a topic, they give you some text, and then you have to discuss.
Got you. Nice. Okay.
So the skills are very different from those that they learn in the IB. So
Right,
it's quite interesting because I think it's an extra skill and it's different.
right.
The differences in the levels there between our school and the rest of Brazil, I also think it interesting because ours is a private school, 20 students, maximum of 22 students per class.
Hmm.
The education is probably much better. Um, the average child in Brazil, and we're talking all areas of Brazil, so we're talking in the middle of nowhere where you have to walk 2 or 3 kilometers to get to school, and the kids will walk it, possibly boat it if they're up in the Amazon. Um, the average number of students in a class will range from 30 to 50.
Right,
Um, there is no classroom management. So
right.
these kids who've got to this stage and who've stayed in school to do these exams at the age of 18, um,
Dedicated
they've
student.
done it on their own,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Let me show
and
you
they've
real quick.
learned
What?
how to learn on
Do
their
it.
own
You know
because
how
they
to do it.
haven't really had proper teaching in the classroom because they
Yeah.
don't manage the classes. If you listen, you'll hear, and if you don't listen, then you won't.
True.
That's the way it works. There's
Got you.
no air conditioning in these classes, and the temperatures can hit 50 degrees Celsius.
Got you.
Um, so
All
when you
right.
put it into context, I would
Right,
have
right.
expected our grades to be substantially higher,
Yeah. Okay.
not
Yeah.
just sort of 60
Barely.
points. They're each out of 1,000, by the way. The total number of marks you can get for each section is 1,000.
Got you. Got you. All right. So I want to show you real quick my the platform that we use. Right. Can I share my screen real quick? And then after that, then
I've
because
got one last thing here. The
oh yeah.
Gawthrup argues,
Okay.
because I've got a nice little text here.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Standardized tests often fail to capture the depth and breadth of student understanding, focusing instead
Right.
on rote memorization and test taking skills. The IB Sciences and NA exams confirm this idea as little time is available to extend knowledge or analysis of particular ideas due to the extremely heavy content and limited time to cover all. This may be true of other subjects, but my speciality is science. So this was the part for me is science. There
Right.
is so much to cover.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
have time to sit back and like relax and say, come on, let's discuss this further. It's like, nope, nope, get it
You
all
got to
in.
get through content. I get it. Yeah.
Exactly. Which the IB has always said, no, it's not the case. We want you to discuss. We want you
Right.
to appreciate. We want you to do more. So it
Exactly.
infuriates me that they want that,
Right.
but there isn't the time to do that.
I get it.
Um, but that for me, I really found that his statement there, that
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me
yeah.
was
Impactful.
absolute.
Yeah, yeah. I
It's
got
all
you.
about get all the content, get it memorized, and get it regurgitated. And you do, even in the IB, we train them on the keywords. If you see compare and contrast, that means you've got to do a positive as well as a negative.
Right.
And, you know, I kind of think the fact that we train them to such an extent does mean that you miss out on the proper learning approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's me.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've
All
stopped
right.
sharing. All yours.
Yeah, yeah. All
You're
right.
going to show me
So
what system you
real
use to
quick,
share the grades.
correct. So what we use, right? And this kind of like aligns a little. Now that I'm hearing the way that you guys do it, and man, I gotta tell you, man, our school, our department at least, our school may not be far off from what we should be doing, right? So these are like the assessments that we use here. It's more aligned to the IB. This is ninth grades. We have analysis and organization, production of text, and use of language, right? This is last trimester. So here, you see a few of the assessments that I graded for them. We were studying the theme based on AI, right, and technology. And so I give them here a little bit of regurgitation here, right? Whereas you can see it's comprehension, chapters 1 to 5, right? But then also they had an opportunity to do an essay, right? And a more detailed analysis, which I think was not a PowerPoint presentation. It might have been like a video, right? And so then they have a variety of different ways to show their knowledge, right? Of course, we also have just the way that I'm grading for grammar and the use of the way they use their language. But for that, I give them a dialogue. So they had to come up with a dialogue, a dramatic dialogue, and then they had to present that. And I saw how they did it, right? Like what was the language that was used? You know, how did they present that to a way that was like higher level? And then they had to create a perfect Android and pitch it in class to us, right? So this is just a few of the assessments that they've had, and the platform that we use is Phidias, right? I found it, effective, right? Effective
And
based on
did
the
the
fact.
parents get to see this straight away?
Absolutely. So the parents have their own login as well. This is the teacher's side, and then the students have their own side as well, right? So the parents can see their own students. So let's see. Maybe if I go back here, I can show you one, like maybe what the parents might see if I go to one of the student views, right? And then maybe I'll go to Sarah. She's assistant. Well done. Oh, since this is last trimester, I'm not able to see it. I don't have that permission right
Okay.
now. But yeah, so the students will be able to like log in here. Let's go. Let's see third trimester here. All right, this is better. All right.
Okay.
So yeah, this will be the student view, and I think the parents might see this view as well. Right. So
So the students can access this immediately. Do you get to put the feedback in here?
so we have a place for feedback as well, right? But we only give that once observation. We give that at the end of the trimester, right? So
It's more like a report.
but it's not exactly. So we don't have like detailed feedback, a place for detailed feedback here on the platform. But what I would do is when I return the assessment to them, then I'm able to give them feedback in class. Yeah. So I do because
I have to say, have you used ManageBack?
not yet. I might have, but I don't remember.
I used it before, and I did like the fact that every assessment you can
Right.
actually give them a grade and the feedback with that grade
Okay. Okay.
for whichever one you put in. It was just a thought that I had that, um, in
Interesting.
this particular case where I'm at now, it's just a grade and
Yeah.
it goes home. And that means that
Yeah.
all the kids focus on is the grade, all the
It's a great.
parents focus on is the grade
Right.
and nothing else. And that's for me where the assessment falls down
Mm,
considerably.
excellent. All right. Well, hey, I think it was a pretty solid conversation. So we're gonna
It was a
tie this all
wonderful
up. It was
conversation.
great chatting with you about assessments. And look, at the end of the day, I don't even like them. I think I'm more of a very creative, like free spirited teacher. So if I could go through a whole school year without actually having given us a formal or like summative assessment, sure. But I get how important it is in some aspects. But I'm an English teacher. I think for science it might be a little bit difficult, right? To do it that way.
Well, I always find English is more skills based.
Right.
because you're
Yeah.
teaching them how to, I don't know, how to analyze a text,
Yeah.
or you're going to teach them how to um, create something
Right.
and debate, maybe.
Yeah.
Whereas
Exactly.
science, it's
Yeah.
factual fiction, and I
Right.
think you've got to present your facts, which is why we have excessive amounts of content.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could take away now, all of that content, as far as I can see, is
Right.
available online.
Yeah.
So if you think about why we're assessing because you want to see if a child's learned something.
Correct.
And in the future, they might want to do more research on something, or they might want to enhance their knowledge. So
Right.
why are we teaching still the same content as we were teaching 150 years ago?
Exactly.
Why are we not saying, look, if we give the kids the basics and they fully understand the concept of the basics, they can research and go into something within science and say, look,
Yeah.
we're going to teach you the basics of mechanics, for example, and then they can go off and have a look at physics and see how it
Right.
works.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what's worse, in the Brazilian system, they're not even given formulae.
Wow.
So they have to memorize the formulae. Well, what's the point? Because that's never going to happen later in life.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Well,
So I think
their
assessment, it's got
focus.
to be useful.
True. Yeah. Yeah. All
So
right.
I
Good
guess
stuff.
for
Yeah.
me, make it useful.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Perfect. Ciao.